let's move ahead to immigration. Premier Daniel Smith says Trudeau upended 40 years of established immigration policy. Let's watch this clip.
I wish Justin Trudeau had put the question forward when he upended 40 years of established immigration policy, but he didn't. He increased and basically took all the limits off all of the temporary program streams, international students, temporary foreign workers, especially low skill, as well as asylum seekers. And as a result, we ended up with an imbalance. Our historic system gave points based on an individual's ability to integrate seamlessly into the economy. They had to have certain job skills, they had to have facility in one of the 2 official languages, and that was the priority. And what we see instead is that our repeated calls to return to that priority have been ignored. We have been asking for some time to have about 30,000 provincial nominees chosen by the province, very similar to what Quebec does, in order that we can provide the demand that we're seeing for provincial nominees, including since we have a large number of Ukrainian evacuees who settled here. And they keep saying no. In fact, instead of increasing the number, they keep decreasing it. And so they're going in the wrong direction. And so what we are asking for is, can we have and should we have a style of immigration agreement with Ottawa that replicates the 1991 agreement that Quebec has with Ottawa. Since 1991, Quebec has had total control primarily over economic migrants. Now, they make a choice to bring somebody in based on whether or not they can speak French so that they can integrate into the economy. We want to make a choice based on whether someone has a job and is able to begin work as a taxpayer and then ultimately move on to permanent residency and then ultimately citizenship. And we need to see a dramatic reduction in all of those other streams. Unfortunately, the federal government agrees. I mean, and anyone who's complaining about this hasn't been watching what's happened since Prime Minister Mark Carney got in. We have seen a decrease in the number of temporary foreign workers, and they're willing to collaborate with us, a decrease in the number of international students. We still have more work to do on asylum seekers and who pays for the long-term support of those asylum seekers as they're waiting to see whether their claim is legitimate. But we want to have control over economic migration because the current system got blown up in the last few years, and we're asking Albertans, which was something they should have been asked a few years ago when all the policies changed, whether they want to go back to something that approaches a more normal immigration policy like we had for 40 years.
Cory, you get to go first.
Yeah, well, again, I mean, hey, let's learn from Quebec. It's funny just watching the response to this. So, I mean, I can't add much more to the case Premier Smith made, except we look at the reaction, and it's Albertans being intolerant, it's Albertans being selfish, and people pointing to Premier Smith prior to, when she had been, and it's true, she had been saying she wanted to expand immigration. But what she did speak to was we need to talk about who we're bringing in, not just how many. And where are our needs for labor? Well, we have shortcomings in the healthcare sector. We have perhaps some need with skilled trades and in building for housing and things like that. But if you just open the floodgates, well, then we see increased food bank lineups. We see hospitals overwhelmed, schools full of ESL children that they can't keep up with. It's not an unreasonable ask. And of course, self-serving as an independent supporter, but just seeing more examples where it's perfectly fine when Quebec does it, but when Alberta does it, they're the jerks. Well, carry on. Let's just keep exposing that.
Yeah. And, I think some of Premier Smith's original remarks were sort of taken out of context because she did clarify a little bit down the road where she said, yeah, we want people from other parts of Canada also to come here to work and help build the Canadian economy. And I mean, we've seen a lot of that, but inward migration from the rest of the country and not just overseas, unskilled, floodgate style immigration. Eva?
Couple of points. One is that I had this great conversation with David Redman. And he was talking exactly like what Cory was talking about with me, checks and balances. We had all these checks and balances for immigration, customs too, but it's all like been thrown out the window. And then when you're just asking for the government to literally do its job, you're an extremist or whatever they want to call you. So I think that's all just such garbage and it needs to be called out. We're just asking the government to put in the apply the checks that are there, because it's all of the steps. It's not just the immigration, but at customs, we've heard all these stories that they're not really looking at what they're supposed to be looking at. So it just trickles down. And the other thing in response is, what about our seniors? What about people that worked their whole life, worked hard, and then their pensions are getting lower and nobody seems to care about them? Like, what kind of society is that? Okay, let's focus only on immigrants and completely forget about children, completely forget about seniors that after working so hard, they get no benefits or terrible benefits. Perhaps, I don't know, we should focus on those people and help them out so that they're not just surviving, but they're also thriving a little bit more. They're able to get a knee surgery when they need a knee surgery. Perhaps that should be a focus in a healthy society.
Lise?
Yep. No, although I appreciate that Danielle Smith would be, talking about economic migration, I think cultural migration is as important. The people that we bring here should align with Western culture and Western values. And if they don't, they probably didn't belong here in the first place. But reestablishing those boundaries, I mean, there's nothing controversial about this, nothing at all.
Yeah. Yep. We've got Conservative MP Michelle Rempel-Garner. I think she was asked by a journalist for her reaction to Danielle Smith announcing a referendum on immigration.
Have you had a chance to take a look at the 5 immigration-related questions that are going to be put forward to you and your fellow Albertans in October? And do you think that things like a 12-month residency requirement for certain social services and a national proof of citizenship law for voting, do you think these are items that we should put up for discussion at a national level?
Well, as both an Alberta member of Parliament, but as the Conservative Shadow Minister for Immigration, I want to, direct the answer to that to the Liberal government. Over the last decade, we've seen the Liberal government bring too many people in too fast for housing, healthcare, and jobs to keep up. And that, of course, has had pressure on provincial government services. It's not just Premier Smith who's talking about the impact that failed Liberal immigration policies at the federal level have had on provincial governments. I remember a time not that long ago when Toronto Mayor Olivia Chow suggested that she might have to raise property taxes because of the influx of, essentially failed asylum claimants that were coming into the city. This is why Conservatives, including myself, have been putting forward common sense solutions to restore order and fairness to the federal immigration system so that, provincial governments who have really borne the cost of a lot of these failures can see a light beyond the current disarray that they already have. I would just say this, my colleague Dan, he had the immigration minister at the health committee, and she admitted full on that the Liberal government doesn't consider the impact on provincial healthcare costs when setting their absurdly high immigration targets, or failing to remove millions of people who are on expired or expiring visas. So the question really is for Mark Carney: will he accept common sense Conservative proposals that are put forward in good faith to restore order and fairness to the immigration system, or will he continue to force provinces to have these types of discussions?
She is right. And I think this goes back to Cory's point from a previous clip. The problems with immigration drives the separatism issue, because you look at this and say there's only one way to preserve what little bit of quality of life we have left, and that is to disconnect ourselves from decisions that are being made in Ottawa that collapse our healthcare system, harm our education system, make it nearly impossible for young people to get ahead, let alone get themselves into a house. And when you look at that and you say these decisions are being made somewhere else and then foisted upon us, perhaps it's time for us to go. Cory?
You've finished a long run. You're hot. And thirsty. This is what we call a last resort. If your most recent electricity bill says the rate of last resort, then your rate is like the half-finished water bottle you noticed sitting on a bench. It will serve its purpose, but there are likely better options available.
Well, I mean, you don't have to convince me hard on
I
being
know.
time to go, but it is one other big factor and people with concern. And as Lise mentioned too, the cultural aspect, we can afford to be, and we must start being a little bit selective. Let's look at what's happening in Northeast Calgary. There's shootings with that extortion stuff going on now with
Yeah.
households. That's been happening in Vancouver. In Peel, we saw a grooming gang. And let's not beat around the bush. These happenings only happen with particular segments of immigrant groups. And if we keep overloading areas where there can't be the cultural integration, and for a lot of these new residents to realize those practices are not acceptable out here, these are going to get worse and worse. And yeah, more and more people are coming to the conclusion we can't save all of Canada, but maybe we could draw a line and save this part anyways. So that's all we've got left.
Eva?
Yeah, it's the trickle down effect. Like I mentioned earlier, with when immigration goes wild, customs isn't doing their job, and then of course the trickle down effect is going to affect what's going on in the provinces. When it was interesting to hear Michelle Rampol say that the federal government doesn't even take into considerations things like healthcare and how it affects the provinces, and hear that, like, to hear people constantly say United Canada, strong, sovereign, we are working with the provinces, and not even to say, hey, Alberta, hey, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, how are you doing with your health care? Is there too many people? Why wouldn't a healthy country ask those questions of their provincial partners? You would think that that would be part of the conversation. If you want to actually have a united Canada, then perhaps treat the provinces like a partner and not like an afterthought.
Lise?
Calling Mark Carney to do the right thing. If we look at Mark Carney and who he's hanging out with these days, it's Emmanuel Macron of France and Keir Starmer of the UK, both of whom absolutely let their nations fall to ashes around this issue. They didn't slow down when they saw the warning signs. They didn't slow down. They accelerated it. This is because people like Mark Carney do not suffer any of the consequences for these decisions. Okay, he is isolated from his own decisions, as are all Liberals in Ottawa. I don't hold out a lot of hope that Mark Carney will do anything to alleviate this situation for Canada. I think underlining the need for independence for the West.
Yeah. I mean, he could do anything at any given moment, and he's done quite literally nothing. Like nothing. Last topic before we let our two panelists go. Thomas Lukaszuk, great separatist leader Thomas Lukaszuk, of Forever Canada. Danielle Smith responds to Forever Canada leader Thomas Lukaszuk, insinuating that her push to halt unfettered, out of control, often illegal immigration is comparable to Nazis scapegoating Jewish people. God, he's the worst. Let's watch this clip and then we'll react.
Well, I hope he would reflect on the reaction from the Jewish community, including the Edmonton Jewish community. If you're going to invoke Nazis and Holocaust, you better be talking about real Nazis and the real Holocaust, which caused devastation to the Jewish community. And so he should apologize and stop using that language and have a mature discussion about what it is that we're trying to address here. The mature discussion is we have a problem. We have a problem that oil revenues are unstable at the moment because of decisions of previous years of governments, his included, that we ended up with over-reliance on oil and gas revenues. We're trying to correct that by having a long-term plan with the Heritage Savings Trust Fund, by building pipelines that should have been built over the past 10 years, but weren't because of actions by the NDP Liberal Coalition in Ottawa. And so we don't want the same lost 10 years going forward. And I'm happy to have an MOU that looks like we're going to see a number of pipeline projects go ahead. That's a midterm solution. But the short-term solution is we have to have really tough questions being asked and answered about how we make sure that newcomers are able to integrate into our economy. And when they arrive, that they've got a job and supports in order to be able to do that. Because of the policies of the federal government over the past 3 years under Justin Trudeau, we've ended up seeing a complete upheaval in what people came to expect of how our immigration was supposed to work. So we are asking Albertans, since it's a change, should we be taking over the economic migrant portion of immigration away from the federal government, similar to the way Quebec did back in 1991? And should we be putting some limitations over how long you have to be in our province before you start relying on social programs? Social programs are expensive. The average person who comes to Alberta needs about $6,000 a year in healthcare, and sometimes it varies. Some people need very little. Sometimes people need hundreds of thousands of dollars. That's why we have an average. But there's always a certain portion that are going to be at either end of that. It costs $12,000 for someone to go through and get support in our childcare system. It costs $12,000 for a child to get support in our K-12 education system. The only place where we do have foreign students paying their way is in universities. And so we're just looking at having the same kind of policies that we see elsewhere. In Ontario in particular, they do not allow the families of temporary foreign workers to automatically get access to health care. The federal government just recently issued a circular saying temporary foreign workers are expected to have private insurance when they come here. And it just stands to reason. If you're going to a country temporarily, every Canadian knows you've got to get yourself covered for insurance. You don't show up on the doorstep of another country and say, hey, pay for my health care, pay for my kids' education.
It's astounding to me that the media still treats Thomas Lukaszuk as a normal person and not an absolute lunatic. Like, I watched that and I'm like, he's going around calling Danielle Smith passive aggressively a Nazi simply because she's willing to put these questions to the public. She's not even unilaterally making these decisions. She's just saying, hey, we see there's a problem. What do you guys think? And Thomas Lukaszuk stands up and calls her and everybody else who thinks that maybe we should be reconsidering some of our generosity to people who have no investment in our province, the worst creatures to ever walk the face of the earth. How does the media still treat him as credible and not just a head of blow-dried hair? I'll go to Cory first.
Sure. Well, Lukaszuk, I mean, it's just vile. And I think part of it is the media wants somebody, I guess,
Yeah.
they could, picture as the opponent to the independence movement, because Nenshi has been basically invisible and useless so far, which is fine by me. But I mean, it's unacceptable. I despise that. Well, for a lot of personal reasons, when people are called
Sure.
Nazis without cause. There was only one group of Nazis, thankfully. There were a lot of horrible periods of human history, but there was only one Hitler, and they did horrific things, and it should only ever be referenced in that context. And when Lukaszuk pulls stunts like that, he undermines the reality and the gravity of what the real Nazi movement did, because this is nothing even vaguely close. And as well, it can inflame an unhinged lunatic who's sitting on
Yeah.
the sidelines thinking, you know what, I'm going to stop this new budding Nazi movement, and then I'm going to take up a
Yes.
firearm or something like that
Yep.
and
Yes.
bring it to a close. And that's really dangerous and irresponsible.
Yeah. Eva?
Going back to what I said initially, we're living in an upside world. The fact that he is giving any credibility. Can you hear me?
We can now.
Credibility to me
Sorry.
doesn't make any sense. Apparently on the Polish radio, he told me to go back to living in an upside down world. I was saying the fact that he's given any credibility given what he's saying. And I think it goes back to this thing. I think more Canadians and actually internationally people are saying it's a fake niceness in Canada. The fact that he told apparently me on the Polish radio to go back to Poland. I actually was born in Edmonton, Alberta. Thomas Lukaszuk was not. But who says that? Like, what kind of society is that? And going around telling people to leave, and we see that all the time. We pretend to be kind people, inclusive people, and the moment somebody has a different view, we're like, get out, Nazi.
Yeah.
Like, what?
Yeah.
What is going on? It's, like I said earlier, an upside down world. I have no other words for this because it's not reality, and we just have to call it out for this is not normal. that kind of reaction is not normal, and it's not healthy, obviously, either.
Yeah, I've been saying for years that Canadians are not actually nice. People are misreading folksy passive aggressiveness as nice. We're not nice. We're uppity and smug most of the time. Lise, I'll go to you, but it is true. Cory is right that when you go around saying to the punch Nazis crowd that those people are Nazis, what do you think's going to happen?
Well, that's just it. It puts her at risk, right? But then here comes Danielle Smith, absolutely mops the floor with the argument, like picks it up and goes, "Okay, you want it? Okay, you want me to address this? Let's go," and just unleashes a torrent of arguments against what he said. And good for her. But I think it's really interesting that a guy that came from Europe did this without any self-awareness about knowing
Right.
how this could land on Danielle Smith. Like, this is a douche move.
Yeah.
Absolute douche move.
Just one of many from that guy.